In 1962, a woman in a terraced street in Sheffield left her front door unlocked when she walked to the corner shop. Not because she was careless, because there was no reason to lock it. Mrs. Patterson next door was hanging washing in the backyard. Mr. Grady across the street was trimming his hedge. The children from 4 different houses were playing in the road, and everybody on that street knew whose children they were. She was gone 11 minutes. When she came back, the door was as she left it, and nothing had changed except that Mr. Grady had waved at her on the way past and asked about her husband's back. She did not think about any of this. It was simply what a street was. Today, in that same city, surveys consistently find that more than half of urban residents do not know the name of a single person living next door. That is not a small change. That is the loss of an entire world. This is not sentimentality about the past. The numbers are precise, and they are troubling. In 2023, the UK government's Community Life Survey found that fewer than 1 in 3 British adults feel a strong sense of belonging to their local neighborhood. In America, Pew Research found that only 26% of adults describe their neighbors as people they know well. The U.S. Surgeon General's 2023 report on loneliness identified the loss of community infrastructure, the daily informal contact between neighbors, as one of the primary drivers of the loneliness epidemic. And perhaps most strikingly of all, studies measuring how far children are allowed to roam independently from their homes showed that the range has shrunk by 90% since 1960. A child in 1960s Britain typically had a roaming range of several miles. A child today has a range, on average, of 300 meters. The street has not become more dangerous. We have become more strangers to it. And the consequences of that estrangement are now showing up in every measure of social health we have.
In the 1950s and 60s, the neighborhood was not a concept anyone discussed. It did not need to be discussed. It simply existed as the natural texture of daily life in working-class and lower-middle-class communities across Britain and America. Streets were not just addresses, they were social structures, intricate, self-regulating, deeply human networks of mutual knowledge and obligation that had evolved over decades of people living close together without the option of retreating behind locked doors and private entertainment. You knew your neighbors because you could not avoid knowing them. Your backyards shared a fence. Your children played together in the road because there was nowhere else for them to go. Your shopping was done at the same corner shop where everyone else's shopping was done, and where the conversation that happened between the bread and the butter was as much the point as the groceries themselves. That world was not engineered. It grew from the particular conditions of working-class life in the mid-20th century, the smallness of the houses, the publicness of the street, the shared dependence on the same shops and schools and churches and pubs. When those conditions changed, the world they had produced changed with them, and most people did not notice it going until it was already gone. The 1960s neighborhood was performing a social function so embedded in daily life that nobody had a name for it. Researchers now call it ambient community, the low-level, constant, informal social contact that happens between people who share a physical space and know each other well enough to acknowledge that fact. A nod at the gate, a word over the fence, a knock at the door with a plate of something left over from Sunday dinner, a child sent to ask if you needed anything from the shops. None of these interactions were significant individually. Collectively, they formed something that modern social science has spent decades trying to quantify and has consistently found to be one of the most powerful protective factors against loneliness, depression, and social isolation that human beings have ever devised. The neighborhood did not require organization or funding or an app. It required only proximity and the habit of acknowledgement, the habit of noticing the person next door and letting them know they had been noticed. The single most significant structural change to the neighborhood in the 20th century was not technology, it was the car. As car ownership spread through the 1950s and 1960s, particularly in America, but increasingly in Britain too, the geography of daily life expanded in ways that quietly dismantled the conditions the neighborhood had depended on. When you could drive to a larger supermarket 2 miles away, the corner shop that had been the social hub of the street began to close. When you could drive your children to activities across town, they stopped playing in the road with the children next door. When you could commute to work from a house in the suburbs rather than walking to a factory at the end of the street, the shared daily rhythms that had brought neighbors into contact with each other began to dissolve. The car did not destroy the neighborhood deliberately, it simply made the neighborhood optional. And as we established in our last video, optional things in modern life have a way of quietly disappearing.
If the car pulled people away from the street, the television pulled them inside. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the front doorstep, the back fence, and the street itself were social spaces precisely because the home offered limited entertainment. People were outside because outside was where life happened. The arrival of the television changed the calculation. Now the home offered something: warmth, entertainment, comfort that the street could not compete with. Curtains were drawn earlier. Front doors were opened less often. The slow migration from the public space of the street to the private space of the living room happened gradually, evening by evening, until the street that had once been a social space was now simply a thoroughfare between private destinations. This was not a conspiracy, it was just the logic of comfort. But the community that had lived in the space between the houses, in the informal, daily, ambient contact of the street, had nowhere to go when the houses closed themselves off, and so it quietly ceased to exist. The corner shop, the local pub, the post office, and the church hall, what sociologists call the third place, meaning the social space that is neither home nor work, was the physical infrastructure of neighborhood life in 1960s Britain. The supermarket replaced the corner shop in a single transaction. It was cheaper, better stocked, more convenient. It was also entirely anonymous. Nobody at the supermarket knew your name. Nobody knew your circumstances. Nobody noticed if you had not been in for a week. The third place did not disappear all at once. It was replaced, one convenience at a time, by something that served the individual transaction perfectly and the social function not at all. We have covered how the neighborhood was dismantled from the outside by the car, the television, and the supermarket. But there is one final mechanism that completed the process, and it is the one nobody saw coming, because it arrived in everyone's pocket. Stay with me. The smartphone did to the street what it did to the dinner table. It made the space between people, the awkward, potentially uncomfortable, socially demanding space of acknowledging a neighbor, of making small talk at the gate, of being present on the street as a social being rather than a private individual moving between destinations, entirely avoidable. You do not have to look up anymore. You do not have to make eye contact. You do not have to nod or speak or acknowledge the person walking toward you on the pavement. You can look at your phone, and so you do, and so does the person walking toward you. And the ambient community, the low-level daily acknowledgement that was the foundation of everything the neighborhood had been, stops being produced. Not because anyone decided to stop, but because the phone made not producing it the path of least resistance, and paths of least resistance, taken by millions of people simultaneously every day, become the new normal before anyone has stopped to ask whether the normal we had before was worth keeping. The 1960s neighborhood was not uniformly warm and welcoming. It should not be remembered as though it was. For many people, particularly those who did not conform to the social expectations of their street, the proximity of neighbors was surveillance as much as support. Gay men and women lived in enforced secrecy within streets that would have turned against them. Families from the Caribbean and South Asia who arrived in British cities through the 1950s and 1960s through neighborhoods that were frequently hostile rather than welcoming.
The belonging that the 1960s street offered was real for many people and entirely absent for others. What this video argues is not that the neighborhood was perfect. It argues that the social infrastructure it provided, the ambient contact, the mutual knowledge, the daily acknowledgement was worth preserving, and that we have not yet built anything to replace it. The goal is not to return to the exclusions of the past. It is to reclaim the connection without them. You remember a street, not the street you live on now, the one from before, the one where you knew which house had the dog that barked, and which house had the roses, and which neighbor would always stop to talk, and which one you could knock on at 7 in the evening if something had gone wrong, and the light would be on and the door would open. You remember being known on that street. Not famous, not important, just known. The person who lived in the third house and whose name the woman at the corner shop used when she saw you coming. That feeling of being a recognized person in a specific place among specific people who expected to see you is one of the oldest and most fundamental human needs, and it is one of the things most thoroughly removed from modern life. We have contacts in our phones that number in the hundreds. We have followers and connections and networks, and we walk down our streets as strangers, past people whose names we do not know, in places that do not know us back. That is the loss, not the past itself, the feeling of being somewhere that knew your name. You cannot rebuild a neighborhood in a week, but you can do one thing this week that the woman in Sheffield did without thinking about it in 1962. Learn the name of one person who lives near you. Not to become close friends, not to commit to anything beyond a name, just the name, and use it the next time you see them. Because what the research on community consistently finds is that neighborhoods do not rebuild through grand gestures or organized events. They rebuild through exactly the kind of small, repeated, low-stakes acknowledgement that the 1960s street produced automatically. One name leads to a nod leads to a word leads to the particular safety of being known in the place where you live. None of this requires money or time or an app. It requires only the decision to look up from your phone when you pass someone on your street, to make eye contact, to say good morning to the person you have walked past 50 times without speaking. The woman in Sheffield left her door unlocked because she knew her street. You can start knowing yours tonight. Somewhere tonight, a front door is open, not unlocked and unattended, open. A person standing in the doorway for a moment after coming home, looking down the street. A neighbor across the road looks up from their garden. A nod exchanged. Nothing more. 11 seconds of acknowledged existence between two people who share a street. It doesn't sound like much. It's the beginning of everything the neighborhood ever was. Two people who know each other exist on the same street and have chosen to let that fact mean something. That's all it takes to start. If this video brought back a street you remember, a neighbor whose name you still know, a door that was always open, share it with someone who has forgotten what that felt like. Because the streets we grew up on are still out there. They're just waiting for us to come back to them. Subscribe to Echo of Yesterday and come back next week. There's more of this to find.